Hello everyone, welcome to our Meetings Assistance for Jehovah's Witnesses channel. I hope you are all doing well. In this video, we are going to prepare for the book study, Complete Testimony, for the week of December 9th to 15th. This week, we will study chapter 19, paragraphs 6 to 13. So, let's get started. Questions 6 and 7, Part A. How did Paul view his work, and how do we know that Aquila and Priscilla thought the same? Paul didn't see his work as the most important thing. He did it only to support himself and to preach the good news without charging anything. We know that Aquila and Priscilla thought the same because, when Paul left Corinth, they decided to go with him to Ephesus, leaving everything behind. In Ephesus, they even used their house for the Christians to meet. This shows that for them, the most important thing was the kingdom of God and helping others, not work or money. Additional comments. Paul didn't view his work as the most important thing, rather, he used it to continue preaching. In 2 Corinthians 11:7, Paul explains that preaching, without cost, was a priority for him, and by doing so for free, he ensured the message wouldn't be an obstacle to those who wanted to hear it. He preferred to do secular work rather than ask for money for his teachings because his main goal was to help people get to know God. Aquila and Priscilla thought the same as Paul because, as mentioned in 1 Corinthians 16:19, they also used their home in Ephesus for Christian meetings and were willing to leave everything behind for God's work. Their love for God's kingdom was so great that they didn't hesitate to join Paul in his mission, even if that meant moving their lives and changing their home. This shows they also viewed their work only as a means to sustain their ministry. Questions 6 and 7, Part B. In what way are we servants of God like Paul, Aquila, and Priscilla? Today, we, like Paul, Aquila, and Priscilla, try to put service to God above all else. Even though we have to work to live, we don't ask for money for preaching or helping others. Like them, many of us also welcome other servants of God into our homes, such as circuit overseers, because we enjoy showing hospitality in serving the congregation. For us, the most important thing is to do God's will and help others in their faith. Additional comments. Today, Jehovah's servants, like pioneers, do the same as Paul. They work to support themselves but do not ask for money for their ministry. 1 Thessalonians 2:9 reminds us that, like Paul, many strive not to be a financial burden on anyone by working other jobs, while always prioritizing preaching. The most important thing is to help people get to know God, not to earn money. Like Aquila and Priscilla, we also show hospitality to our brothers, as mentioned in Romans 12:13. This gives us the opportunity to strengthen our faith and be encouraged by visits from our brothers. Showing hospitality is a way to put God's kingdom first, as it helps Jehovah's servants continue their ministry and sets a good example of Christian love. Questions 8 and 9. What did Paul do when the Jews turned against him, and where did he go to continue preaching? When the Jews refused to listen to the message and turned against him, Paul told them that it was no longer his responsibility if they did not accept what he was preaching, and from that moment on, he would go preach to the Gentiles. Then he went to live in the house of Titius Justus, who lived near the synagogue, and there he continued preaching. The house of Titius Justus became the place where the new believers gathered. Additional comments. When the Jews rejected Paul's message, he did not give up or get angry. Acts 18 verse 6 shows that Paul told them they would be responsible for their own decision. This reflects Paul's patience, as he did not get angry or close the door on the Jews. Despite their rejection, he continued preaching to the Gentiles because his love for the people was stronger than the rejection he faced. Paul didn't stop doing anything after the Jews rejected him. He went to Titius Justus' house, which was probably a Jewish proselyte. Acts 18:7 shows how this place became a center for preaching to new Christians in Corinth. It's an example of how, even when things don't go as expected, we continue looking for ways to preach and share the message. Question 10. What shows that Paul didn't stop preaching to the Jews? Although Paul said he would go preach to the Gentiles, this did not mean that he stopped preaching to the Jews. In fact, Crispus, the leader of the synagogue, and his family believed in Paul's message, and many other Jews did as well. This shows that, even though he was going to preach to the Gentiles, if any Jews wanted to listen, Paul was willing to preach to them as well. Additional comments. Even though Paul decided to go to the Gentiles, he didn't close the door on Jews who wanted to hear the message. Acts 18:8 says that, many of the Corinthians who heard the message began to believe and were baptized. This shows that, even though most of the Jews did not accept the message, some did. Paul continued preaching flexibly, because he knew that some Jews could also be receptive. Paul didn't limit himself only to preaching to the Gentiles, he had the desire that everyone could hear the good news, as shown in Romans 10:2, where it mentions that some people are devoted to God but don't fully know His will. Even when the Jews opposed him, Paul continued looking for those who might be seeking the truth. He didn't give up, and that is an example for us. Question 11. Just as Paul did with the Jews in Corinth, what do Jehovah's Witnesses do to help people who claim to be Christian? Today, Jehovah's Witnesses try to do the same as Paul, help people who believe in other religions, even though it can be difficult. Many of these people have deeply rooted religious traditions and sometimes don't want to listen. But we don't give up because we know that among them, there are those who are looking for the truth and want to learn more about God. Like Paul, we keep preaching, even if some do not accept us. Additional comments. Like Paul, we also try to help those who have good intentions but are bound by traditions that are not correct. Romans 10:2 mentions that some people have devotion to God, but not based on accurate knowledge. This means that, even though they are sincere in their belief, they need to learn the truth. That's why we don't give up but continue preaching, hoping that these people will find the true teachings of the Bible. Today, just like Paul, we don't give up even when people don't want to listen. We know that in many places, traditional churches have great influence, but Acts 18:9 9 to 10 shows us that Jesus is with us in this effort. Just as he encouraged Paul to keep going, he gives us the strength to not be discouraged, even when people or religious leaders reject us. Question 12. What did Jesus assure Paul in a vision? Jesus told Paul in a vision not to be afraid to continue preaching because he would be with him and protect him. Additionally, Jesus assured him that there were still many people in Corinth who needed to hear the message. This gave Paul a lot of confidence, and that's why he stayed in the city for a year and a half, teaching about God. Additional comments. In the vision Jesus gave to Paul, he told him not to be afraid because he would protect him. Acts 18:10 shows that Jesus assured Paul that, "No one will attack you to harm you." This promise of protection gave Paul great confidence to keep working in Corinth without worrying about the dangers he might face. The vision also reminded Paul that there were many people in Corinth who still needed to hear the message. Jesus told him, "I have many people in this city." This shows that there are always people willing to listen, sometimes we just need patience to find them. Jesus not only offered protection but also the motivation to continue preaching. Question 13. What might Paul have remembered as he approached the tribunal? Why was he sure that something similar wouldn't happen to him? When Paul was taken to the tribunal, he might have remembered how he had agreed with the death of Stephen, the first Christian martyr. He might have feared that something similar could happen to him. But Paul was calm because Jesus had promised him that no one would harm him. He knew that, just as Jesus had protected him, he wouldn't face the same fate as Stephen. Additional comments. Paul might have remembered the sad event of Stephen's death, the first Christian martyr, since he was present at that moment. Acts 8:1 shows how Paul, then called Saul, agreed with the death of Stephen. It's natural that when facing another tribunal, he might have feared for his life. But, despite those memories, Paul knew that Jesus had promised to protect him, as stated in Acts 18 verse 10. That promise gave him security. Although Paul knew that the trial before the tribunal could be dangerous, he trusted that nothing would happen to him because Jesus had protected him and had told him that no one would harm him. In Acts 18:10, Jesus assures him that he would accompany and protect him, which gave Paul the peace of mind that he wouldn't suffer the same fate as Stephen. Well, these have been the practical answers for this week's congregation book study. I hope it is very helpful to all my dear brothers and sisters. Sending a big hug, and may Jehovah bless and protect you always.